I remember going to Ladies.ux, I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2 or 3 years ago at WeWork. And from what I recall, that was the second meetup, yeah. So it's really nice to see how it's grown. Thank you, Sander and Erik, for welcoming us in your home. I want to talk about UX testing for the real world. So just to start off, let me ask, how many people have been running a usability test? Have run a usability test? Okay, that's quite a few people. In the last year? Moderating? Okay, cool, awesome. That looks roughly like what I would expect, or what we can expect. Let me do this. Yeah. I believe it was Nielsen, but also another agency looked at what kind of tools UX designers use, UX professionals actually, and 80% of people said that they use usability testing. And now we all kind of know how that goes, looking at the number of hands that were raised. We write a script, we figure out what we want to ask people, what we want them to do, we recruit people, we get them into a lab, ask them to think aloud, and then we observe what they do and we report. That's, at least I think most of the time, the basic approach. And then every now and then we might want to make it a little bit more extensive if we want to like test multiple prototypes or different concepts, if we want to compare different groups. So it gets a little bit more advanced. How many people have been doing usability testing outside of the lab? Okay, quite a few. Cool. So that's basically what I want to talk about. How can we bring the practice of testing in a lab closer to the outside world? How can we bridge what happens in the real world and what happens when we can't get the laptops to work and the presentation on the big screen? I think we all know that whatever we test in the lab doesn't necessarily work in the real world. I'm happy to see that some people actually do test in the real world as well. This is my personal frustration. Every morning when I try to brush my teeth and I try to change the setting, it has 5 settings but only 1 button. And it has only 1 button and 5 settings that I can't like easily read. And especially when I'm brushing my teeth, I have no clue what kind of setting I'm on. There we go. There we go. Let me just try and, change this setting here. There we go. So this is my experience with Philips, and I've worked at Philips, so I know how thorough the testing is done at Philips. But it doesn't make it the same as being in your bathroom in the morning when you're actually trying to brush your teeth. So to make this evening a little bit more interactive, because I do know we're also here to connect with each other and to learn a little bit from each other, I want to ask to pair up with whomever's sitting next to you. You can try and shout to the end of the room as well, if that helps. And try and exchange the story of how you kind of made your UX research more real. What have you done recently to bring it more close to reality? Was that? Can I start with you, Sander? You've done research. Sure. Or you two can discuss it together, yeah? All right. Wow, that gave me a really nice break. And I hope it gave you really nice stories as well. Aiden, can you tell me a little bit about like some information that you shared?
Oh,
You two were talking with the three of you?
Yep.
With the three of you, yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, Sander had a good story, actually. So maybe you want to.
Yeah, sure. So my story is that we created a new prototype for a My Factory environment, which had a homepage with basically just a nice picture of some people in a hip environment, looking at a MacBook and pointing and laughing. And I went to user test this, but we did this at basically a hospital in The Hague. And it was a building that was going to be deconstructed, so it was a really old environment. And I met this person who was sitting behind an old desk in an old environment, and he was looking at the picture like, what are these people doing? I don't relate to that at all. Are they looking at baby pictures? And so that kind of made me realize that when we were desktop testing it here with people in the building, we were like, oh yeah, that's a nice picture. But in the field, people can really disconnect from using a photo which they don't relate to.
Already put them off at the first site.
Yeah, at the first site, before they even started using it. Yeah.
Cool, great example. Anyone else? I'm staying at the front here so everybody in the back can feel safe. But do you mind sharing what you discussed?
Sure. Oh, sorry. I thought that was really handy, you holding it. Anyways, I work at a B2B, and we sell construction stuff. So I basically go onto the site and sit in between the dust and the materials and the whatnots, and I bring them coffee.
I'm sure they're very happy to have you.
Yeah, so I just do it on the spot there.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, and you bring a prototype or?
Yeah, clickable prototypes, usually mobile, but sometimes I just bring the laptop. Right. Yeah, depending on, or if I know they're going to be there and they have like you have to subscribe to the site, and I know they've subscribed, then I will test it then and there on theirs.
Okay, on
and
their
just
own
have my
computer.
backup, so you know.
Yeah. Great, cool, awesome. Well, thank you guys for discussing. I hope that gave you some inspiration. I was thinking about like how I've been doing this in the past, like how I've been trying to make whatever I was testing more real, and how I try to cover for the fact that we are still sometimes in a lab or in a little bit of an artificial environment. Unfortunately, not always the opportunity to go into the field. And I recognize that I do a few things like before I even start testing, while I'm testing, and after the fact, after I've run a test. And I want to walk you through some examples of things that have worked for me in the past, hoping that it might inspire you to also look at alternatives and things that you can do next to your conventional UX research and all the things you're already doing. So yeah, step one, I would say using real people, using real data, trying to elicit real experiences. I'll have an example for that. How to create a real experience, how do you create the real behavior, how do we extract a real experience, how do we get people to do something that actually resembles with what they would do at home. How do we extract real opinions other than the, yeah, that was fun, I enjoyed participating, which at least I hear very often as soon as the recording's still running. And then how to share the story afterwards to make sure that also the team understands what's really going on. Oops. All right. So in using real people, I'm sure you all, being known to usability testing, are familiar with coming up with your recruitment criteria. Saying like, okay, we want like a mix of gender, a mix of age. We want people that are in a particular, that use a particular platform, or that live in a particular location. I want to add something to that, which is something I kind of ran into when I was testing something called city guides or stadsgidsen. And this is a Facebook product that you can try for yourself. But we noticed that the way people talked about how they would find information about places to visit in the lab was, and when being interviewed, was very different from how we recognized ourselves trying to find information while being on the go. So this is when we actually went out onto the street to test what we were looking into there. And based on this, I would actually say that next to the conventional participant recruitment we already do and the criteria we include, I would also include in what phase people are. So for example, I remember a project at the gemeente Amsterdam, we were looking into people in debt. And it made a huge difference when we had a participant who was actually like in the phase of having had 10 letters, not wanting to open them anymore. And his response to the information we provided was very different from people who were kind of on track, or at least sort of knew what was going on with their own situation. So I would say that next to thinking about the criteria of the person, also the situation that the person is in is something that we would want to include in recruitment. And this is more recent actually, maybe a month ago. I was looking into how to test starting up with a messaging application. And now, from my experience, if I set up a messaging application, I think Brian and I have done it often enough. I think we've maybe tried like 5 or 6 of them. We sit next to each other and we're talking about it, and we're like, hey, can you try this one, or send me a link, or which one is it again? What's it called? So there's a lot of communication going back and forth. So in this case, the recruitment criteria for me wasn't like, I need a particular person, but I need a particular set of individuals together. So this is something for me that's now on the mental list of if I create recruitment criteria. I would also add, am I actually looking for a person, or is this a group of people at the same time? Right, now the effect of using real data. And I think there's a lot of sort of academic discussion around like how can you include more real data in your studies, especially if we're working with prototypes. And I think we all know the limitations of prototyping tools, that it's not always easy to like make it personal when you're testing with someone, to use someone's actual name or to like as a very basic example, even include the time of day, because each test session happens at a different time of day. So sometimes the timestamps don't make sense to people. This is a study we did for ING, where we actually collected user data first in a survey before directing people to an online prototyping tool. And the information we collected was then included in their individual prototype. At the time for this study, that was critical to us because we wanted to know how personal can the information be. So I kind of mocked this up, but what if the website would say, "Good morning, Hester," when I'm not even logged into the website? Does that feel creepy, or is it sort of okay because I expect that Facebook does it, or whomever? And we also took it to the extreme of, what if it's the name of your child that we're using? What if we say like, "Hey, start saving money now because you're gonna, your child, Eric, is gonna graduate soon and he's gonna, I don't know, want to buy a house, so start saving so you can help out." So we try to find the limit of where does it get creepy. So we really needed to have that personal data included. But it was also, let's say again, a mental note of how important it is and what a difference it makes if we actually use someone's personal name. So yeah, in a way you could use screener data for that. I have a different example later on as well. Then this is kind of like during a session when you're having your interview and you're trying to create like a little bit of a relaxed environment to move on to testing afterwards. We usually try to understand what motivates people, what their needs are, what kind of situation they're in at the moment. Of course, we can ask questions, and I think, is it 2 weeks from now, maybe a month from now, Maaike Mak is gonna present a lot more about that. This has been a way that for me worked in trying to get things very visual. This was a project at Philips where we hired an illustrator to work with us on site, so that when we would be talking to parents and teenagers, that illustrator would sketch out the situation at home for us and then present it back to people as in, is this what's going on? And that made it very interactive and helped us get to the core of like what that home scenario actually looked like. Made it a lot easier and a lot more in-depth. So that's something that works, but yeah, there's some other things like next to visualizing or illustrating. Like at the very basic level, I think I've done it in a test to kind of draw an emotional graph in talking with someone. Like, okay, so if my pen's here and you describe what your experience has been in obtaining this mortgage, for example, where does my line go? Do I go up or down, and what's happening in those moments? You don't need a lot to actually visualize it, and that really seems to help a lot in getting people to talk about what's really going on. Also asking for metaphors and asking to bring artifacts from home. So this is kind of becoming part of my my routine in setting up a test and talking to a recruitment agency or talking to participants myself to figure out what can I get them to bring. What can I get them to bring to a lab, or what can I get them to prepare for in advance of an interview? And this doesn't have to be like a big burden on participants. It can also be like, bring me the newspaper that you had at home yesterday, or the leaflets that you received in the mailbox. Anything that bridges a little bit between, again, what is happening in the lab and what actually happened at home, and what does their home look like. So that's about eliciting real experiences. Now, for creating real experiences, and this is a luxury I haven't encountered anywhere else, but it's really nice, and again, because it was critical to the project, something that happened where we used volunteers to participate in usability testing of MRI devices. In this case, it is critical because you really do need to understand if someone's not overheating. So in order to test that in a safe environment, we actually use people who can indicate that they are overheating. But also to make sure that, let's say, the trolley safety mechanism and the stickers, the labels, how you control it, works in a way that is safe and you can't hurt the patient. It helps to have an actual patient rather than a doll who doesn't like say, ow, that hurt. So yeah, creating real experiences, simulating both the environment. So I remember testing a remote control. It's very different if you're sitting on a chair testing a remote control, or if you're like, there's a couch in the other room here. If you're lazy on the couch and you have your meal next to you and you have your beer next to you, and then you need to use the remote control. But other people are definitely a factor in there that we could use confederates for, or how can we make it resemble the real experience?
I have a question about simulating the environment. What do you base that on? How do you know what the real environment looks like in some cases? Do you do research on that before?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because I think I haven't been in the situation where I actually needed to do the research because the information was fed to me. So this example with how does the MRI scenario work was a situation where I worked together with clinical experts, and they would kind of describe, well, this is what happens, and then that was what we were going for. But I think it's a very good question. How do you get that information? Almost requires a study beforehand. Most of the time, I would say it works to either like sort of trust on your own experience, like the messaging application, verify that with some peers as a baseline. But yeah, you can be as rigid as you want in that, I think. Yeah. Right. This is another example, and I mentioned before about screener data and like trying to use the screener data of what has worked, where we ask people in advance of the test, is it okay if we use your phone number during the test for test purposes? But of course, people were recruited a week in advance. They didn't always remember that. So when during a process of logging in, they actually got a text message, they were quite surprised. But it did resemble, let's say, the experience of them not looking at their phone because it was next to the laptop, but like digging into their bag. Where is it? Am I still on time to fill in this code that was on my phone? And that was us, basically, my colleague in the other room checking, like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Okay, hit send. But it works because it's...
But it's also why I like when I'm testing an app, or that I like people to test it on their own device.
Yeah.
Because they can get messages, phone calls, you know, something that would happen in real life.
Yeah.
So that's why I prefer them to test it on their own phone, if possible.
Most definitely, yeah. I think that's also, a great advice, and for us to kind of like push back to others in the organization, like, oh, we can't do that, or we're not ready yet for people to test it on their own device, or there's always a way to prototype it, and yeah, indeed, the notifications already help, yeah. What else do we have? Right. This was not my idea, by the way, but I think it was an excellent idea, so I do want to share it. It was the most fun day we had at ING, trying to test mobile payment and how you would handle mobile payment if you were to be in a shop, buying a coffee or picking up a package at the post office. And what we did was we created a number of cards that were kind of like annoyance cards that we handed out to a group of colleagues who were briefed beforehand. And we set up our test lab in a way that it seemed like you would be going to the post office. And we gave participants the assignment to go buy a coffee, go pick up a package, go buy a ticket. Wearing their jacket just the way they would come in, as though they were in a shop, but with our confederates, our annoyance people walking around, like standing awkwardly close to them while they're about to pay, and they have their PIN code on the phone, and everybody can see their the amount of money they have in their bank account, or interrupt them last minute. We had an actress behind the counter who would kind of delay them and say, like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about something. Let me fix this first, and then come back 2 minutes later. So you have to start the process all over again. But scenarios of which we thought, like, this might be what it works would work like in real life. Yeah.
How do you get the initial reaction of people in these situations? Because you now talked about things that are like really subtle in the experience. For example, you're being interrupted and you start all over again.
Yeah.
So while they're in the situation, you actually will have to wait, like approaching them and asking them, how was it going? Or?
Well, so you need a lot of people for this. Because of the, let's say, the confederates and the actress and a coordinator walking around, me and another researcher could actually walk around and observe and code the behavior. But you do need a lot of people, and mostly we relied on the experience they reflected upon afterwards, where they would talk to each other in kind of a focus group setting. Yeah.
I'm curious, in this particular situation, how you took notes. Are you just literally just scribbling down notes, or do you have a system, a spreadsheet, particular things that you're looking for so that it's for each user is the same? Or?
Mm-hmm. So there's my how I wish it would have gone answer, and the real, the real world. We had a coding scheme, but what happened when we were walking around, because there's still a lot of chaos and there were a lot of people around, that we didn't necessarily stick to it.
Yeah.
So we had a few things in mind that we wanted to look out for, like people starting to shield off, or like taking their jacket off, or like actual behavior, but to be honest, we didn't code it.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So on extracting real experiences, I've had it a number of times when in a test that someone would say, oh, in this case, I would call support by now, or I would stop using this. in some cases, I would then say like, okay, so that makes sense. Let's move on to the next task. I understand that you would stop using the tool now, or that you would call support, but we can't do that right now. So in the interest of testing, let's move on. But I've also done it where I would actually suggest to call someone. And this is basically something I want to keep as a mental note to do a lot more often, to make sure that someone's sitting ready with a phone to answer potential questions. Usually there is a product manager in the room, there is a designer in the room, all people who understand the system very well and who can answer questions. So it's sometimes much better to hear the actual question or the actual, see the actual behavior that would happen. This is something that worked nicely as well, is where we asked people to send an email to another person, because they would need to extend an invite to that person. So rather than kind of leaving the process at the part of the testing in the lab, this is as far as it goes. We kind of broke the outside wall and said, okay, then write the email. We didn't send it, but they wrote down what they would write to their, in this case, spouse. Hey schatje, je moet dit of dat meenemen. That helps to see, like, are they actually like including a link, for example? Do we need some kind of sharing option, or like do they copy a list from the website?
Isn't that part of experience? It's not just the tool or the app or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's something before the tool, there's something after.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
People tend to forget.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's more to
And I think it's, I would say let's forgive ourselves for forgetting, because there's usually a lot of time pressure and you're happy to have a prototype at all, that it's difficult to also think about like the rest of the flow. But yeah. I'm kind of hoping that things like this, like the small little hacks, make it easier, because it's easy as soon as it's in our system and in our routine to include it. Yeah. Yeah, write an email, make a call. Another thing that has worked well was to just leave people in a room, to walk out when you're going to ask your colleagues if they have any other questions anyway, to just stay there for a few minutes and see what happens, because sometimes people start exploring an application or a website on their own, and you see them go back to things that they are actually more curious about, even though it wasn't addressed in the test. But also, it's a bit hard to tell from the picture, but this is an example of a tool at Facebook that helps businesses understand who visited their store after seeing an advertisement. I ran the same study basically twice with the same people, the first week that they started using a tool and 2 weeks later. And it was just interesting to see that after 2 weeks, they hadn't used the tool. Even though, of course, during the first test, they would understand like how they could use it and how much value it would possibly add. But they had access, and after 2 weeks, they just hadn't opened it. They hadn't done anything. So just allowing for time is helpful sometimes.
Did you ask them to use it, or did you just do the test and then let them go?
Yeah, I asked them, based on the use cases that we had discussed in the first session, what they thought would be most interesting to them, to use the time before we would get in touch again to explore these options and find answers.
So even though you asked them that,
yeah.
they didn't.
And still doesn't make it, make for it that it doesn't interest them, but it helps to understand that they are people that are busy. So if we would want to introduce a new tool, it might take half a year. We can expect like people to like adopt something new in 2 weeks just because it's fun and interesting. No. All right, last one, almost. I'm not sure how we're doing on time actually. 10 minutes, okay. Oh, we're good. Yeah, using a confederate. I think I mentioned it already a couple times, because you can use a confederate in a lot of different ways. I enjoy the luxury situation sometimes of like doing research in pairs, which is really nice because you have someone to take notes. But also next to that, you can kind of like switch up who talks to the participant, who does the moderation and the interviewing, and who collects someone from reception, for example, takes the elevator up or the stairs up, and bring them back down again as well. And in working with a design team, I've also asked designers, like, okay, can you ask them these specific questions and then get back to me? So, for example, what did you think about it? But as soon as this is the person who wasn't asking the questions, they get a different answer than I do. So it's something that we do anyway. There is someone that needs to guide them out the building again, and it's an easy addition. All right. Okay, I'm gonna prepare for this time. So I'll be here to make sure that I can grab your attention back, because I know this is going to lead to a lot of excitement again probably. But can you pair up again the way you did before and think about the next study that you plan on doing and help each other figure out how to make that one more real? And go. I think I'm getting the hang of the attention grabbing with the bottom, but not everywhere. Can you share what you would do next time? The upcoming study that you have planned, if you have any?
I just thought of something, but I'm not quite sure if we should do that.
Okay. Do you wanna get some input on it? There's loads of people here that can help you understand if it works.
So within a factory,
We're currently building a participant project. That's what we're busy with. And it's basically currently when we have a new client, the client needs to put in the entire list of every employee into our system so that we know which employees you have, and so that we can send out the survey. But what we also need to know is like what kind of teams do you have, who's manager, who's in charge of who works where, what kind of gender do you have, like all the kind of information is very vital. Well, there are so many different HR systems out there, and everyone does it in a different way, and some companies even just have an Excel sheet with people. But also our system needs to have a few things that are very vital, like for instance in the factory we have one team with 2 people, which is the design team. Well, that's not allowed in our system because then animosity is gone. So those people need to be merged together with like product development, and sometimes in Excel sheets names have not got a capital or something like that, so that doesn't get recognized in the system. So we wanted to, so it takes like 3 weeks going back and forth with one HR manager to get this whole Excel sheet in optimal order to make it work in our system. So we want to improve that, the whole user experience of that. That's acceptable. So we had an idea, which is we asked just this one HR person to add the people that work below them, or like someone who knows that like these are team managers or scrum masters or whatever you want to call them, and it's like up to 10 people most of the time, and then they get the task of adding people that they are in charge of or they work with, so that those teams get added and those teams get added and those teams get added, so that it trickles down. But the founder of the company here, we had a conversation with him, and he was like, yeah, well, they have to type in names, and well, we don't want to type in names. And he basically, when I asked him, like, okay, so what would your ideal situation be? So, like, how would you find an ideal thing? And he basically described the current way, but then without any of the obstructions that we know is happening in the real world, because we've actually, like, he's actually researched that.
Yeah.
I only work here for 3 weeks, so.
And you haven't?
Yeah, so, and then he didn't know that those things were there, and it wasn't a time and place to tell him, like, to break his dream. So, for lack of a better word, so I kind of had the idea of to make him experience that. We have 2 founders, so I just thought of like how awesome would it be to like make the founder that was being obstructive today do it in his way, and make the other founder use the system that we thought of, and then split the factory into 2, and which group is faster, and which group finds it more pleasant to work with. And then just see what happens, which is like real time, real experience, and also make the person who we want to realize it himself. I thought that might be an idea.
It sounds like as real as it gets. Testing it yourself by using it yourself as a company. Cool.
Yeah, because it's also really hard, because it's very sensitive data. I can't just like go to a company in this street and say, hey, we want all of the information of all your employees because we're testing it. Yeah, it's not. And then also if we're testing something we're not sure works, we don't want to do that with a new company either. So testing ourselves.
It's dog fooding, which is a great thing to do to make it real as well. Yeah.
If anyone has a better idea.
Build an API. You don't need anything else. Automate it.
That's our dream. We're currently researching if we can do APIs, but not every company has the same HR system. Some companies have Excel sheets, so then we have to like build like maybe 6 or 7 APIs, and we still have the situation of a company that has an Excel sheet. So we have like lots of fringe cases. So we kind of need a cover-all solution. So we'll also like the solution that we're thinking of is also going to include the API. But if you do not have it, then we'll have a really cool idea to also do it, but with a nice user experience. So yeah, you have to think of every situation.
Thank you, Cynthia. I guess you need a lot of field work in your case to to understand what the real situations look like.
I'm so excited about working here.
Good pitch.
Yeah.
All right. I have 2 more slides, and in the interest of time, I'll try to be brief about this. But I don't want to miss out on some experience in how to share the results, because I think it's something that we all struggle with, and I continue to struggle with it because I've seen a few companies now, and it's always difficult to get people to understand and adopt all the insights we already have, which is a shame. This is something that worked well, was also quite an investment, so I'll be honest about that, where we developed personas at ING, all data-driven personas, so they were archetypes, not like based on actual people, but like the average person in everything. And we invited actors to play in a documentary for each of these personas. And after we had shown that documentary, we'd spread it across the company. And then unfortunately after I left, but I went to see it, we invited the same actors on stage for a live Q&A, so that the teams would feel like, oh, they're the actual people that we can talk to now, and we can ask them questions about what kind of products they want. And some people actually thought that they were real clients. So it was very convincing in a way. And it was based on data, so we did know that these were representative.
I've made personas before, and I've experienced that it's extremely difficult to create them on data without being biased. I'm very interested in how you do it.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you more about it. We had, let's say, the lucky benefit that about a year before we started the project, people had self-identified as a specific persona, and we could map the data to those individuals.
So like actual people say, I'm this kind of person?
Yeah, and then we could map the types of products that they had,
and they did that on
their usage data. That was done in a survey initially, and then we kind of like how do you say that? Like we mapped the recent data back to what they originally said that they were like. Yeah. But we can talk more about it. It's not easy. It's
because you still have to think of questions, like very specific questions to ask, so you're still guiding them into a 10.
Yeah. It's archetyping. Yeah. It's some other ways. I'll jump to something more recent, just because it works well. If all else fails, bring balloons. This is something I did 2 weeks ago, and the fact of having balloons in the room that would pop, because I asked people to burst balloons based on assumptions that we demystified, that turned out to be false in research. To make something that visceral of actually a balloon popping in your face worked really well to share the story of like what was actually happening when we showed the product to users. So that's one that I would want to leave you with, because it worked so well when I did it, and I would want everyone to spread balloons all over the place. All right, that's it. Thank you.